Hello and welcome to today's Dark Reading virtual event panel titled SecOps for Today's Complex Cyber Threats, sponsored by CyberMax and Elasticsearch, brought to you by Dark Reading and broadcast by Informatech Target. I'm Rob Wright, Senior News Director at Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. Let me just run through a few housekeeping items before we begin. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. You can submit questions to our presenters at any time by typing them into the Q&A window. Additionally, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we will be glad to offer some assistance, not promising that we'll fix it, but we'll try. You can also hit F5 or Command R on a Mac, and this will refresh your console. Finally, feel free to keep the conversation going in the group chats accessible in the zones area of the virtual event, as well as the group chat on this webinar console. You can have this webinar and the virtual event open at the same time in separate browser windows. Now on to the panel. SecOps for today's complex cyber threats. Security teams today juggle dozens or more of security tools, many of which are not well integrated. Often they don't have the resources needed to fully realize all of the features of the tools, which can impede their ability to respond properly and efficiently to a security incident. How can the cloud and AI be harnessed to streamline and empower security analysis in the age of SaaS and other infrastructure security challenges? What types of processes and tools can help sift through this telemetry and ferret out actual threats or attacks? In this panel discussion, experts will discuss these issues and how SecOps teams can improve their detection and analysis of a security event before it escalates. And now I will introduce, well, I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. Lisa, why don't you start?
Hello all, my name is Lisa Jones-Huff and I am from Elastic. I've been here for 5 years. I got my start in cybersecurity about 20 plus years ago at a company called ArcSight back in the day. Have done deep packet inspection, have done UEBA, but centered around mainly SIM. Good to meet all of you.
Thanks. Jesse.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jesse Whaley. I am with Digital Cyber Forge, a consultant and advisory firm. Prior to that, I was the CISO for Amtrak for 6.5 years, and I had a career in the Department of Defense prior to that, which included building and running the Pentagon's Combined Joint Cybersecurity Operations Center.
Thanks. Zach.
Yeah, my name is Zach Hoffman. I serve as the Director of Professional Security Services here at CyberMax. Before that, I've worked at a couple different MDR providers, including SecureWorks, for just about a decade. I've touched about every role you can imagine in a SOC.
Excellent. Jason.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Lang. I'm the practice lead of the target operations team at TrustedSec. I've been a red team operator for going on 10 years now, and now I manage a team of very good red team operators at TrustedSec. Probably been doing InfoSec about 20 years, and before that, worked at a Fortune 500 doing domain administration and Active Directory work.
Great. All right, let's start with a broad question for you guys. How has SecOps changed or shifted over the last, let's say, 5 or so years, either for better or for worse? Jason, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I would say probably in the last 5 years, I mean, there was something of a watershed moment when we could tell as red team operators that EDR started landing on endpoints, because that was a big game changer. Prior to that, it was things like, antivirus and stuff like that, and those things were easily worked around from a compromise standpoint, which led to, viruses, NIMDA, I love you, things like that, if you guys remember, going back a while. But now it's much more the various EDRs that people have, and the security operations team is typically trusting those EDRs for things like their MDR capability, like Falcon Overwatch or things like that. And so from our standpoint, as a red teamer, our job is, if we do throw an alert, can we talk them down? Can we have them close it as a false positive? Because, things like analyst fatigue is a very real phenomenon. And so our job is to make things look, as legitimate as possible. But a lot of that has changed over the last few years, because, there was a whole curve up from things like Splunk, and on-premise SIM and things like Graylog, and then it moved to Cloud SIM, and then all of a sudden EDR kicked in with their various SIM capabilities. And that's what we see a lot of SOC teams using now for most of their detection posture.
Lisa, how about you? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think to Jason's point, I agree. I mean, there's just more data. You know, when you start to think about when you did introduce the endpoint and the whole shift left mentality, you know, it's not just the alerts, it's just the raw telemetry, the amount of data that these analysts are having to sift their way through. So it's just becoming more and more challenging to try to understand, you know, what's noise versus what's real signals that they need to investigate. So it's just the sheer amount of data that they're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, to kind of tack on to
Oh, sorry.
what, yeah, let's say to kind of tack onto what Lisa's saying too. Like, it's the sheer volume of telemetry we can receive in a SOC, right? People's toasters will now send logs to your SIM if you want them to. So, you know, you need, as an SOC analyst, you need to be able to understand logs from pretty much any type of device, because they're all connected to the Wi-Fi. You know, they're all on the network. You can compromise the printer as a foothold. You can get into the rest of the network. So you really need to be able to understand pretty much every device you can, or you can find knowledgeable information on.
Jesse, what about you?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me if I think about 5 years ago, what happened 5 years ago? COVID, right? And a lot of companies that were traditional brick and mortar, everybody worked on site, and especially critical infrastructure companies, most people worked on site in a SOC. Because of COVID, that forced a lot of those companies, those legacy companies, to adopt a remote workforce to essentially survive the pandemic. That led to having to retool, and which led to some tool sprawl and some other things that I think we might talk a little bit about. But when I think about what has happened, specifically in the critical infrastructure sectors over the last 5 years, is a lot of that infrastructure required refresh, and so I think a lot of organizations took an opportunity to change the way that they were operating critical infrastructure assets from systems that were fairly closed and not connected to the internet to systems that that are out in the physical world that control physical things in the real world, and connecting them to the internet, to the cloud, to different workloads, to bring forward modern technology into those operating environments.
So you mentioned tool sprawl. I got to ask you guys about this. From my perspective as a cybersecurity journalist, I hear about constrained budgets, but it seems like there's a lot of purchasing of products, too much purchasing of products. Is that what you guys are seeing? And why do you think that's happening so much? Anyone can jump in.
I think that people like the shiny penny. I mean, someone who's been focusing on data analytics for so long, I see everyone is always asking, are you integrating with X, Y, or Z? So yes, they are buying a lot of tools, which does lead down the path of so much data, so much noise, but they're not also taking into consideration, am I getting maximum value out of the investments in technology that I already have? And that's the conflict. When you continue to buy, you start to get into a situation where becomes a visibility gap because of the sheer amount of noise by introducing all of these disparate tools. And then when you get into the investigation aspect of this, having to swivel chair if you don't have your detection techniques set up properly in your SIMs, that becomes an issue. So I think, for teams like Jason's that are focusing on red teaming, that's why I think it's so important to stay in front of those types of things, because of all of these disparate types of data sources that are now being collected that weren't previously being considered, and understanding the types of attacks and techniques that are being leveraged by all these new data sources. I think the work that Jason's team becomes more and more important to stay ahead of that and test for these types of things.
Things that we see is that buying a tool is the easiest decision for a company to make. It's really, really easy to throw money at a problem, especially at upper echelon levels of management. There's a problem, somebody recommends a solution. How much money do you need? I need X amount of money. Okay, cool, go buy the tool. We're going to neuter it and drop it down maybe 20% of its capability just to get into production. The rest of those features we're going to turn off. And now you have a tool that you've paid for. Nobody really considers total cost of ownership. And now we're in major problems. And that's how companies blow a truckload of money. And as red teamer operators, we take advantage of that, and if we see tools that are not properly implemented, or I'll call it like leftover tooling, then we look at those things, we investigate those things, and the truth is that technical debt incurs a very high interest. And that is something that we take advantage of all the time. I mean, the most secure companies that we run into today from a operation standpoint are the ones that have almost no technical debt. They're running purely in the cloud, things like that. And it's those old organizations that are, they still got mainframes, they still got, Windows 2008 systems and things like that for legacy reasons. Those are the ones that are easy pickings, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think tool sprawl is probably, in my opinion, the most expensive form of technical debt. Like he said, that if you're only using 20% of the capabilities of a product that you've invested in and deployed, a lot of times what I see happening is companies and teams going out to market and procuring another tool where they already have a tool implemented that could do what they're going out to market and buy. They just haven't turned on those additional featured functionalities, get the outcomes that they need. And from a CISO perspective, it's very easy. If we go back to the last 5 years, there's been a lot of investing in cybersecurity compared to a decade or 15 years ago, where boards and C-suites are eager to throw money at a problem and expecting it to go away. Well, just throwing money at a problem won't make it go away. I think buying more doesn't solve the problem. It's about better integration, better implementation, training, rationalization of the tool set that you have. Right. And we don't want to forget about the people, because if you've implemented something that the people that are sitting in the SOC don't know how to use, then it's just all going to waste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think an interesting idea to think about too, and aligns with everybody else on the panel here, is that a lot of times too, like new EDR tools and stuff, that release new features that will potentially replace other tools in your system, right? SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, releasing rogue endpoint detections, RMM management. There's a lot of functionality in those tools that can sometimes replace some of the other tools you have there. So staying up to date on the new feature releases for your existing tools, I think, is an incredibly important way to help reduce tool sprawl, to prevent the need to look at other tools entirely.
And actually, to that point, staying engaged with your product vendors and doing regular quarterly business reviews, providing feedback on how your team is using the product and what you'd like to see out of the product, you can really help steer the product roadmap for a lot of companies, especially if you're all in on something and you're utilizing it and you're like, well, it would be really great if we had this feature, and if we have this feature, I'd be willing to pay a little bit extra, and then I don't have to go buy something new and implement yet another tool and introduce that to our environment.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. I mean, I think that people are so quick to blame their problems on the technology. Let's blame the vendor. It happens on a daily basis. And, I always say that I'm very old school. I think that the problems center squarely on people and process. You really have to focus on the best practices and the foundation of what makes a SOC a good operation, is investing equally on the people in the process that are going to be taking care of the enterprise. Technology is always the one that is to blame. So I agree 100% with what everyone's saying.
One of the things I always harp on too is back to the basics. Sure, tools will solve problems, but if you get your fundamentals down, your networking, your role-based access controls, all the foundational stuff we learned back when we were all starting in cybersecurity, if you get those down, you need less tools. You need them to fulfill specific functions and stuff like that. But if you get your basics down pat, there's less of a need for some of the newer tools.
So I want to ask, since we're on the topic of technology, products, tool sprawl, there's a lot of new stuff. There's been a lot of advancements, generative AI, large language models, agentic AI especially. How is that, or is it, affecting SecOps? What is it doing? What impact has it had so far? I know we're in the early stages, but what have you guys seen?
I'll take that crack on the analytics piece of it, coming from the vendor side. I think that AI applied properly. Everyone talks about AI. Everyone's talking about AI. Everyone, but is AI being applied properly? When we think about it from our perspective, on the Elastic side, everything starts with data. So what can we do from an AI perspective, to apply solving a data problem? So the things that we're focusing on are being able to help customers with the parsing and the normalization process, because sometimes it takes, if I have a net new product and I don't have the integration, it takes time to build those parsers. Apply AI to automate those processes. And then when you think about, I have all of these alerts now, I build out my correlation, all my detection techniques, but I still have a lot of alerts. So applying AI to that problem by leveraging, the generative aspect of this, by sifting through all of those alerts and stitching together, doing the correlation for you, and basically mapping out, where you are in the journey of an attacker that may be progressing through your network, just by summarizing all of your alerts. And again, just being smart about how you're applying AI. And I think that it's more important for customers to challenge their vendors with regards to, you talk about AI, but how are you applying it? I think that that's one of the biggest things that I always tell customers to challenge their vendors, because it makes a difference with regards to how you're applying it to give a customer the outcome that they're looking for.
I'd say AI and machine learning have actually been around for years. Like,
Yes.
what's just kind of new is the generative AI is AI that can ingest volumes and volumes of data and produce new content based off of automatically analyzing that data, and that's kind of the next advancement, I think, of machine learning in that regard. So where we've seen AI is not in a place where you can just turn it on autopilot and let it run and protect your environment and you're done with it. It's more of an assistant at this point. It helps the humans that actually need to do the analysis, to do triage, which it's really good at. It's really good at doing kind of that initial triage and sifting through a lot of the noise that Lisa just mentioned. But we still need that human in the loop, and we still need some strong guardrails around it for specifically decision making. And it's similar to kind of earlier days of automation. You don't want to automate a bad process, because you'll just speed up the cycle to failure. Yep. in that case. So AI can't, and what we're just talking about with tool sprawl, AI can't fix that for us, right? We still require humans to actually install and uninstall the equipment that's being used. We still require humans to figure out what the data sources are and send it to the right tools, and manage all the tools in the ecosystem in a sense that is best aligned with the mission of the organization and the budget of the organization. You can't do everything.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that you just touched on, Jesse, like the ability to do correlation and low-level triage, is probably where I've seen the most impact. Using it to help gather all the data related to an event or a case for the SOC has been one of the most successful ways I've seen it used. It can take time to gather all the related activity that you're seeing on a host or from a source IP, especially across multiple clients, across multiple tools. So using AI to speed that up has probably been one of the more successful ways I've seen it used in today's kind of SecOps landscape. But I'd be really interested to hear, Jason, your take on, kind of potentially using that as a red teamer.
Yeah. On the red team front, AI is definitely used by operators to exponentially drive new tooling. It is being used by malware groups. I just read a post the other day about a new malware family that's actually AI aware, in that it will rewrite itself on the fly depending on the target and host that it's on. And so, I mean, we can expect that. Defenders can expect something like that. As a red team operator, I quite frankly don't encounter it too much on the defense side. Like, nobody's come to me and said, now granted, this might be a communication thing. Nobody said, yeah, our AI found you, or we ran this agent across this data set and we discovered you. I personally don't see AI being a particular threat to actual attackers until behavior analysis actually comes into play. And that's just a big challenge that vendors haven't figured it out yet. You know, it's some do, like there's like, you know, Exabeams out there and things like that that will, you know, do some, you know, actual UBA, that sort of thing. But until that becomes built into products that clients and customers have at large right now, AI from a defensive standpoint, again, I'm speaking with a red team mindset, we don't see a whole lot of that. It's simply just a matter of evading existing alerts, evading detections, coming with a bypass for, you know, MDE's rules and CrowdStrike's rules and stuff like that. But once behavior actually steps in, and by behavior, I mean something like this user for the last year has been browsing these intranet sites and connects out to these file shares. And then on day 366, now they connect to a different file share they've never seen before. And then that should get AI's spidey sense going, and people are like, what's happening here? And that might throw a lower or medium severity alert depending on, you know, the data source that the user's connecting to. That's something that is a red teaming nightmare. And so once vendors actually figure out how to do this, then we're back to the, you know, the C-level having their dream of just being able to throw money at it and, you know, solve the problem with money in that way. So, but until that happens, not really a huge deal, at least from the red team side.
And I'll add something to what Jason mentioned, because, you know, coming from a company like Exabeam, I agree that, you know, and what Jesse mentioned, machine learning has been around for a long time. And being able to apply that as a detection technique, you know, one of the things that I've found, you know, like I said, being in SIM for way too long, you know, it's a combination of traditional detection techniques along with machine learning and marrying those things together. I think is a much more comprehensive approach to identifying threats within the environment. So I agree, +1 with regards to really leaning into the machine learning aspects of it. And the thing is that it's been around for a long time. So leaning into that, I think is something that customers do need to take into consideration.
So I wanted to circle back to a point that came up earlier, just about the volume of data and the massive amounts of telemetry, just everything that has to be analyzed today and everything that's being generated today. It makes my head, as an outsider, as a journalist, like makes my head spin when I hear some stories. But I'm curious, like, is AI going to be required to handle this volume of data as it just keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger? I mean, I know a lot of organizations don't keep their logs very long, but there's still a ton of data that's being produced that needs to be analyzed. And is machine learning and AI going to be, I guess, an imperative for that?
I'll take a first crack at that. I mean, I don't think AI is what you would use to apply to that. From my perspective, I think that it's having a data strategy and understanding, you know, what data do I have in my environment? Where is it located? Who owns it? You know, how long do I need to retain it? And making smart decisions of where you're going to store it. You know, not everything needs to go to a SIM, as an example. Some data can naturally go to an object store and be searchable through a threat hunting exercise instead of being used from a correlation perspective. I think that people don't spend enough time understanding the data that they have and making informed decisions with regards to where does that data need to reside and how often and how frequently do I need to access that data, and having a strategy to consider it. And then they get so overwhelmed, oh, I can't do that, so I'm going to stick with my existing investments and things like that. But I think that I don't think that there's I think this is an enterprise consideration, an issue from my perspective, not necessarily an AI issue, but would love to hear my fellow panelists get their take on it.
I think I agree with Lisa. A lot of organizations that I've seen will just take everything they can and throw it towards the SIM. But to Lisa's point, you really, really only want to forward your security relevant logs. Like, what am I going to use to detect malicious activity? Yeah, especially in today's world where every SIM pretty much charges by volume of data ingested into that platform. As we move to the cloud, you really want to be cognizant of what you're sending to your SIM and how is my SOC going to use this data? Is it going to be used for correlation? Is it going to be used to detect just in general malicious activity? I think it's really important, like Lisa said, to have a good data strategy to know where you're sending stuff and if you're sending stuff is going to be beneficial to the person that's actually analyzing the data that gets put in there.
And I agree. I mean, there is a place for, you know, AI moving forward, but it's really no good without having the right strategy Besides having, kind of the top level, you have your corporate strategy, and nestled under there, you have your business unit strategy, cybersecurity being one of them as an enterprise strategy. But I think almost, parallel to like a cybersecurity strategy is a data strategy, because it's just not cybersecurity relevant data that a company needs to worry about. I mean, there's whole lots of other, valuable insights that can be gleaned through, the petabytes and zettabytes of data that may exist in an organization, and managing that so that you're not spending all your profits on storing and analyzing data. Then you'll run yourself right out of business, which wouldn't be cool at all. So I think having more of a tiered data analytics strategy makes a lot of sense. Like what goes to a SIEM? Well, security relevant data. What goes to a visibility and observability tool? Well, you want to know system uptime and how it's performing, things like that, right? And then there's other storage options today, which is much cheaper and much more affordable to retain certain data longer if you don't need it kind of in an active access state, right? You could throw it in some cold storage somewhere and use different tools or search querying language that are much cheaper to analyze that data.
I'm probably a bit more cynical in my approach, and forgive my bluntness, but the as a red teamer, so I'm cynical. Your question used an interesting word, which is required. Is it required to do the job? No, it's not required to do the job. Is it going to be required? Yes, it's going to be required, because upper management won't be able to not have AI, because again, it's something that they'll be able to throw money to once vendors come up with a solution. So my job as a red teamer is to simply stay where I know logs are not being gathered, because it's either too expensive or things like that. So for example, very, very few organizations are gathering things like web traffic logs like inside in their internal network. Great, that's where I live, and I'm happy to continue doing so. So I do eventually, and I'm not gonna like throw AI totally under the bus, because I use it and I like it, and it's definitely a productivity enhancer. But honestly, give me a company with well-configured group policies over the latest AI madness any day of the week from a security standpoint, and you'll see a red teamer just cry. And the truth is that most people in upper levels of management, like this is why I'm a consultant, because I get to come in here and I basically tell upper management everything that their low-level SOC and defenders are already saying, and they're like, "Wow, this is great. You're an expert." I'm just saying what your people are saying. Just trust your people, because they're smart people. Right. And so, if I do think there's a place for AI, I do wish that companies would trust their people more than they do, instead of just trying to throw money at it.
And can I pull on one quick thing with what Jason just said?
Yeah, sorry, guys, I'm going to go on mute now. See, it's been fun.
No. You're making valid points, and from the eyes of a red teamer, I mean, it's super awesome in my opinion. I think that one of the things I wanted to pull a little bit more on in terms of what you said, Jason, is, when we come back to the data strategy, what data am I not collecting today, and then take advantage of that? I mean, that hits home. I mean, that really does hit home, and understanding that. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about from a data perspective that I think is really important, from a SOC perspective, is business contextual data. I don't think that people make that type of data a first-class citizen. There is data within an enterprise that helps describe what an asset is, who owns it, what applications are running on top of it, who is this user, what's the role in the organization. That's what some of these UEBA platforms were doing, and that's why they became so popular. So I don't think that organizations make business data, that contextual data, a first-class citizen, because that information, if it's enriched on the logs that are being collected, that helps informs the analyst decision-making. So I think that that's something that what Jason really was mentioning, it just made me want to go a little bit more into detail in terms of considering the fact we're talking about data. That needs to be a first-class citizen, in my opinion, is data's context.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I got to jump in on that. I couldn't agree more. The only vertical I've ever seen that has an actual, a really good data classification strategy is legal. And so whenever we get into the legal space, they're always like, go after client matter data, and they code it as something like red data or things like that. And you see right at the top of it, because we pull down client matter data because we're hackers, and we know there it is. And that goes into the screen and into a report, and then it's all hands on deck. And for organizations that don't have a data classification policy, I can throw things like bank statements and passports and all the social security numbers, all that. And people are like, wow, that's bad. And we're like, yes, it really is bad. And you need a data classification strategy to be able to properly manage that data and then associate your internal risks with that data.
Yes.
And those things just don't happen. So especially for large, older orgs, it just doesn't happen. It's too hard.
One more point on what we're saying about strategy. We talked about, well, regardless of whether the security team wants to use AI or not, your company, your employees in the company, your organization, they want to use it. They are using it, whether you like it or not. So you need to have an AI strategy. You need to have governance, and you need to understand what the business cases are, what the use cases are around AI use within the company, and what the outcomes the company is trying to achieve. And as part of that strategy, you need to understand what the data and platform architecture is and how that fits into the strategy. And that all kind of falls under a governance, risk, and a trust framework that consists of a lot more than just like the CISO organization. It's IT, it's legal, it's compliance, it's all of the business has to come together to really understand how the company is going to use AI, and everyone's in alignment of what governance and what guardrails we're putting around that as a company.
Yeah, I want to pull on two strings there. One, I think Jesse's hit the nail on the head. Governance and policy is huge with AI. Really putting those guardrails in and taking the time to build out what your organization's AI policies and processes are.
Yeah.
Like, what's acceptable usage of generative AI in your environment? Is it writing a client email, or is it parsing all of my client's data and putting it in a readable format for me? Probably don't want to do the second one. You probably don't want to be putting client data in a generative AI. At least if you can help it. And then the second one I wanted to mention was, I see a world where we could use AI to kind of query or correlate data across those different cheaper data storage options. So an example of what Jason was talking about, can I pull the web traffic data if I see suspicious activity on an individual host in my SIEM? Can I use the AI to correlate that? Kind of like we used to talk about doing with SOAR platforms, which I think that term has fallen out these days, but they do exist.
Yeah. No, actually, I'm glad you guys brought up, people, policy, strategy, because that's where I wanted to move next. In fact, I'll probably just be replaced with AI next time out for the dark reading panel. They'll just have a little icon. They won't even need me anymore. You guys can
Are
just.
you sure you're not AI already?
I could
You're
be.
bringing it up, Robert. You're bringing it up.
I could be. Maybe I outed myself. Apologies. But yeah, no, let's turn more into people and policy, because to Jason's point, I do hear this a lot in my position. It's like, it's not the technology. The technology is generating the alerts, or the security team is missing alerts, or they're going after the wrong alerts, or they just don't have the business context to see what data is really valuable, and this data should not be over here, and vice versa. So I guess, what are some of the frequent, I don't want to say mistakes, mistakes, errors, things, a lack of policy that you guys see out there, that you see organizations doing, where they're falling short with that sort of process?
I think something that...
You don't have to name any names either. You just,
Why not?
after this is
the red
done,
teamer.
we'll talk.
I know this guy, Zach Hoffman. Let me tell you about him.
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a couple times in this panel, but it's really common for organizations to want to just throw the money at the new tool rather than people. You can always find good people to either get creative with the existing tools or know how to utilize the tool better, for example. It's a lot easier. I think, Jesse, you actually mentioned this in one of the talks we had. It's a lot easier to get new tools approved than additional hires in some cases.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why? That seems so strange to me.
I think from a business perspective, a CFO's biggest lever that they can pull to control the company finances is headcount, is the cost of people, right? And it's, a lot of times, companies will have like a big new initiatives. They hire. They can't hire quick enough. And then this big new initiative is done. Well, now that what do they do with all these people that they hired? Well, and they're bleeding cash, and like they don't have enough for them to do. So then they pull the layoff lever, and the cycle starts over again, right? Until the next big initiative comes forward. But I mean, I think in terms of a lot of what we're talking about here is strategy. But my kind of early days of writing strategies, it was about people, process, technology, right? Those three components. And kind of once I got into the CISO seat, what I learned is there's actually like two other components of that. It's partnerships. It's like, well, who do you need to partner within the company, both within the company and outside the company to be successful? And then the culture of the company. If the culture doesn't support the strategy or the initiative or whatever you're trying to do, or security in general, you'll never be successful. So there's different ways to make sure that your strategy is aligned with the culture or moves with the culture instead of against it. But I think that's often what's missed, and it's something that I've missed in my career, is those two things, is missing out on like what partnerships do I need to have in place, and whether or not the culture is supportive of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly that, from a people and process perspective, I again, getting back to, they're so quick, organizations are so quick to buy tech. Everyone loves to buy tech. But I would love, and with Jason on the call here, I would love more investment in the people that actually work at an organization. I love the fact that there are organizations that are now doing their own tabletop exercises and understanding what if scenarios. And, there's tools that are now being introduced to help you go through bettering your environment, understanding the investments in technology, and then doing these red team exercises, attacks that are very specific to you or your industry. I think that it's really focusing on your teams and whether or not they do, if something happens in your environment, are they prepared? Are they actually prepared? So for me, I think that it's those types of things. And then, because I think that that's one of the ways that you can keep people in seat if you want to keep their job interesting, instead of being so inundated with noise and they burn out, continue to invest in them in terms of education and these types of exercises, or, being able to up level into maybe a red team. If I'm maybe tier 1, tier 2 on a SOC, I want to become a red teamer. Investing in those individuals and giving them a path to keep their job interesting, if that makes any sense.
As operator,
hang on with Lisa there. I think education or continuing education is a huge one, right? You want to make sure that anybody in your SOC or your organization has a chance to upskill, to learn new techniques, to get new certifications, to learn new tools. That's the only way you can keep up, especially in our field. You need to be able to stay on top of stuff, go to conferences, learn about cutting edge stuff, go back to your basics every once in a while. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of companies don't necessarily want to invest in their teams. Like what Lisa and Jesse have mentioned, it's easier to just get the new tool.
I'll give you my perspective. As operators, we live in the people and process failure zone. It's almost never a technology problem. I have yet to encounter a client that is running any kind of recently modern, stack that is lacking technology. It's almost always people and process. And so with people, it used to be things like social engineering, right? We would set a fish, or we would make a phone call, or things like that, and we would rely on the people failure there. Well, the truth is that defenses have gotten significantly better on the social engineering front. They truly have. Organizations are investing in things like quarterly or more, maybe monthly, social engineering exercises. People are seeing this more. They're getting more comfortable with identifying phishing, and companies started giving people a process to follow, which is that we think there's a phishing email, press this button, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So great. So that helps on that front. But now we live in people failure in a different way. So for example, I was working with a trusted insider, somebody who was acting as my internal threat, so to speak, and I was manipulating his machine with his consent as part of the exercise. And I must have done something that threw an alert, because he sends me a text, kind of panicking. He says, "Hey, the security operations team reached out to me, and they want to know what I'm doing. What should I tell them?" And I said, "Well," I said, "What do you like? Like, what are some of your hobbies?" He's like, "Oh, I love fantasy football." I was like, "Sweet. Just tell me you downloaded some fantasy football software and you were just, messing with it." And it ended up being one of his friends that worked in the SOC. And so this guy was lying to his friend, and his friend was like, "Oh, okay, great, no problem," and then just whitelisted and closed it. And it's like, that's the kind of people and process failure that we rely on. And I'll give you another one that has like some subtle inferences. So I sent a phishing email to a client, and every day they had a stand up at the top of the day where they took what they thought were the most likely phishing emails, and they went around the room and decided which ones to triage. And so my email comes up, and now think about the group dynamic, like put the human aspect on this. There's 15 people in a room. Somebody throws up an image that says, is this a phishing email? Should we investigate? One person, all it takes is one person to say, no, that looks fine. And then everybody's very quick to agree because they don't want to be the one standing out like a sore thumb. So we're abusing the people element of it, because we don't want to inflamed egos, like all that kind of stuff. Red teamers live in that space. Attackers live in that space, and we rely on it. And so when people fail to follow processes that are documented because they're friends or they don't want to look dumb or they feel embarrassed or things like that, that's all understandable, but that's how red teamers win.
Oh, geez, this is, I came into this panel hoping to be like uplifted, to be more positive, and
you invited me, Rob. We talked about this.
That's not where this is going. And oh, by the way,
I'm going to drop always off. Suck the wind out of the room.
Yeah.
Is it drink 30 yet? I mean, can we go pour shots?
Close enough.
I've got to go update change some passwords and update some credentials. We are coming to the end here, so I guess, guys, like closing thoughts on where you see, I guess, SecOps going in the future, like how it may change, continuation of some of the trends that we've talked about, or something completely different that we haven't mentioned yet. The floor is yours, really.
I guess I'll kick us off here. And when I think about the future of SecOps, one thing that I think is certain is the landscape is going to continue to change. Whether it's the technology that a organization is using, the threat landscape is going to continue to change. But when it comes to SecOps, I think it's really about achieving a balance between what automation is available with human expertise, with staying on the innovation curve of technology, making sure that you're aligned to the organizational mission or the business goals. But all of that doesn't really matter unless you actually have the fundamentals in place. And we hinted on it a little bit earlier, those foundational security practices. So the future of SecOps has to include, the security, fundamentals, right? And it goes all the way back to, all right, well, what are we trying to protect here? And if we look at the original definition of information assurance, now it's the same for cybersecurity. It's, assuring the confidentiality, integrity and availability of data and information. So if we focus on those fundamentals and we achieve balance between automation, human expertise, innovation, the technology and mission, then I think the future for SecOps is bright.
I'll go next.
I like it.
No, please go ahead. Please.
No, it's all you, Lisa. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa.
Yeah. So just real quick, I would hope that customers really do strongly consider making data a first-class citizen in their environments. Whether or not that's going to happen, who knows? But being able to apply AI in ways where they can actually see the outcome of, is this improving, my team? Is it something that can be measured? People throw around the term operational efficiency, quite loosely, but it really does come down to, how is AI being applied, and are there efficiency gains when I'm using AI in my operation? So for me, making data first-class citizen, I hope, and then applying AI in the right way, and being able to track whether or not it's improving the day in the life of my analysts or my engineers or what have you.
There you go.
I'll go next so Zach can go last and leave us on a high note. I actually do think the future of security operations is a good one. I do think AI has a place, and for me, that kind of good future looks like speed to mitigate. I mean, all you have to do is have an X account and just follow all the 0 days and all the things that get dropped all the time. I think AI is going to be very, very good at saying, okay, in this organization, here's the technology stack. Here are the most relevant threats that just got released on November 13, 2025. Go fix it. And then you have a remediation team that's just on it right then and there.
Yeah.
Is that going to fix things like people and process problems? Not so much. And that's where technical debt and all that kind of stuff is still going to be problematic going forward. But from a security operations side, the faster they can get to responding to new threats, the faster they can determine false positives from true positives. And AI is going to be a force multiplier in that space. But the faster they can do that, the more effective they're going to be.
I guess I'll just kind of close it out with agree with everybody. I think SecOps has a bright future. I think we're going to see a lot of reinvestment back into people, hopefully. I mean, AI is definitely going to play a part. Everybody's going to use the AI buzzword, but as we've alluded to, it's been around for a long time. So we're going to use it as a force multiplier and hopefully really invest in the people and get them, additional training, resources, understanding what they're seeing and what they're doing to help reduce the time to remediate.
Great. Guys, thank you so much for doing this. I know I joked about being hoping to be uplifted and have a more positive conversation, but I think it was depressing at times. But
change your password, Rob. Just change it now.
Yeah. I've got a lot of
click that
passwords
email you just got.
Yeah, right.
No. I don't click on any emails, so that's don't worry about that. But thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience, everyone watching out there. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for attending.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.